Shalom, my friends. Welcome to Weekly Parsha with Yehuda, concluding this book of Bereshis with Parsha Vayechi, which is we're back to the ending on the Vaye Parshiot, right? With Miketz in the middle, but we get to conclude on one of the Vaya Parshiot. So, yay for that. This Parsha, okay, we're going to have to go through some misconceptions, right? Because, on this channel, we like to deal with Christian misconceptions of the text and show what you've been missing this whole time in understanding things through the lens of truth that Torah Judaism gives the perspective on, right? That has been passed down from generation to generation. So let's get into it. So this is all about Jacob, blessing his children before he dies. He is going to give them blessings, right? Just as Jacob received a blessing from his righteous father Isaac, Jacob is passing down that blessing, which we know is actually linked from Noah to his son Shem, who is also known as Melchizedek, who gave that blessing to Abraham, who Abraham passed to Isaac, and Isaac passed to Jacob, and Jacob passed to all of his sons. So, and including Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, as we will see. So here we have the blessings. So here we have Jacob taking Ephraim and Manasseh together, and Jacob explains that he is going to take Joseph's sons as his own, similar to the way that Reuben and Shimon are his first two born. So that's where he says here, as for your two sons who were born with you in the land of Egypt until I came to you, to the land of Egypt, they are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be like Reuben and Shimon, like his first two born. So what ends up happening is, so he's recounting, the tragedy that happened to Rachel. And yeah, I have the Rashi commentary here if you want to take a look. We'll get into more detail if I see something that might be interesting. So here it is, the blessing. So Joseph, this is the famous scene where Joseph is concerned because Ephraim is at his right from Israel's left, and Manasseh at his left from Israel's right, and he brought them near him. But Israel stretched out, this is Jacob stretching out his right hand and placed it on Ephraim's head, although he was the younger, and his left hand he placed on Manasseh's head, and he guided his hands deliberately, for Manasseh was the firstborn, right? And Joseph had a problem with this initially, right? So the blessing that was given is right here. It says, this is actually a very famous lullaby that Jews actually give to their children. And it's also a famous passage that Christians like to take out of context. Because what it says, and he blessed Joseph and said, God before whom my fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob walked, God who sustained me as long as I am alive until this day. And then it says, may the angel who redeemed me from all harm bless the youths, and may they be called by my name. So the Christians like to conflate this verse and say that God is the same, because the angel is doing the blessing, God is doing the blessing, that the angel and God are the same. So that means that this angel was God, which is a silly argument, right? Especially in context with the idea that prophets often speak on behalf of God. It does not mean that they are God simply because they are doing something in harmony with what God wants, right? Same thing with the angel. It's very similar. It's literally an almost one-to-one concept. Angels act as agents for God just because their actions might be attributed in some vague extension of God's will does not mean that they are worthy of our worship. And once we get into the book of Deuteronomy, you should watch my video on Sam Shamoon, where I went on his show and I explained this using what is described in Deuteronomy 4 if you want to get more detail on that, and I'll be happy to put the link in the description. But what's going on here, so this song that we sing, it goes, Hamalach hagoel oti, Hamalach hagoel oti mikora, Yivarech et haneyarim, V'karei vahem shemi. It's a beautiful song. You can look it up, and it's a lullaby that people sing to their children. And it's so we're very familiar with the song, and we do not understand it as the angel being synonymous with God. So just letting you know, the rabbis understand this. Rashi's not saying that this angel is synonymous with God. This is not according to our tradition. So please do not quote our rabbis out of context saying that they believe that this angel was God, because they don't. You can see it very clearly here. So, moving on, we have Joseph being concerned about his father putting, the opposite heads based on the age, his hands on the heads that were opposite the way that he had envisioned it. And Jacob basically told him that, yes, Ephraim, or he says rather Manasseh is going to be he's going to be the father of a great nation, but Ephraim will be even greater, even though he is younger. Like we said before, the firstborn seems to always get the short end of the stick in the Tanakh for whatever reason. So Gideon was descended from Manasseh, so he was great in that sense, but Yehoshua was, the descendant of Ephraim, who led the Israelites into the land, and he was more prominent as the successor of Moses. So then we have, you have Ephraim and Manasseh taking their respective roles. I've heard another nice little thing that Ephraim and Manasseh were not envious of each other, and they both, the way that Manasseh internalized his brother was not out of envy, which is something we can learn from. We all have different roles, and some might have roles that appear to be quote unquote greater, but that does not minimize our own roles in our lives. So I thought that was a nice little lesson to learn. So we have more blessings of the sons of Jacob. And so actually this is interesting. It says, Jacob called for his sons, gather, and I will tell you what will happen at the end of days. Wow. So it says he attempted to reveal the end, but the Shekhinah withdrew from him, so he began to say other things. Because basically I guess he had like a prophecy, and then he ended up not getting the full revelation that he thought he was having. So then he ends up blessing Reuben, and Reuben, of course, as we know, gets the short end of the stick. You were my strength, you were my might, superior in rank. And then it's like, too bad, so sad, you're not going to have superiority. You're going to basically be subordinate. Sorry, I'm going to sneeze. All right. Moving on. Shimon and Levi, right? Well, it describes the incident with the couch, right? That Reuben did earlier with when he wanted Leah to lay with his father, and kind of the implications of that. So, okay, fine. So he lost the birthright because of that. He also, and you notice him and Yehuda were having that, like, trying to be the responsible person. Reuven's solutions were usually inferior to that of Yehuda's. So I'll throw that in there too, even though it wasn't called out, but I think that was building up to it. Shimon and Levi, so they are kind of called out as well. They're not given, they're kind of chastised a little bit. Let my soul not enter their council, my honor. You shall not join their assembly, for their wrath killed a man, and in their wrath they killed a man, and with their will they hamstrung a bull. Cursed be their wrath, for it is mighty, and their anger, because it is harsh. I will separate them throughout Jacob, and I will scatter them through Israel. So, interesting that, this is mentioned a lot, that he didn't curse them, he cursed their wrath, right? And it's mentioning that Levi is not counted among the tribes because of its unique priestly status. Here, you don't really have the priestly blessing implicated here, which is interesting. It didn't really take shape yet. That obviously happens later. But yeah, it's interesting to see Shimon and Levi kind of lumped together and their anger being cursed instead of this distinct blessing. Contextually, I guess, in time, this is what was happening. So that's what it is. Yehuda, this is where it gets very interesting because Christians love this for some reason. I mean, this is a more specific messianic prophecy, right? I don't think anyone really disagrees. This might even be one of the more explicit messianic prophecies in the Torah, right? I would say it's in at least the top 3 in terms of name, Judah, the kingly role of Judah, right? So yeah, it's comparing Judah to Reuben, saying basically that Judah has a better leadership role, describing him like a lion. So here's the verse that usually comes up in conversation. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the student of the law from between its feet until Shiloh comes, and to him will be a gathering of peoples. So it says, from David and thereafter, these who bear the scepter after termination of the kingdom are the exilarchs, princes in Babylon, who ruled over the people with a scepter and who are appointed by royal mandate. So I've heard Christians try and say that because Shiloh is identified as the Messiah, that the timeline has to align with the destruction of the Second Temple, and they will contextually abuse this concept. Well, clearly that's not what the rabbis are saying. You just read it here, and we can go directly to Sanhedrin, where it says, this is taught as a Baraita. This is in the Talmud, Sanhedrin 5a, right? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh comes, right? The term Shiloh is understood to be a reference to the Messiah. Great. But then the Christian stops and makes up their own timeline of what that means. Well, too bad, Christian. That's not what the rabbis are saying. They're not saying the Messiah has to come before the destruction of the Second Temple. Here's what they're actually saying. And therefore, the verse is interpreted as delineating the authority of Jewish rulers during the exile, before the Messiah comes. The scepter shall not depart from Judah. These are the exilarchs in Babylonia who are empowered by the government and consequently subjugate the Jewish people as with a scepter. Nor shall the ruler's staff from between his feet. These are the grandchildren of Hillel the elder who hold the position of Nasi, Yehuda HaNasi, who lived during the exile after the destruction of the Second Temple, not before, and teach the Torah in public, but do not have authority to actually enforce their judgments. That is what is meant in Genesis 49:10, right? So any Christian who tries to tell you different is simply taking this verse out of context for their nefarious purposes, right? So moving on, he blinds the full, so you have some, messianic implications here about the binding his young donkey and the garment with wine and the blood of grapes, vines as raiment, right? So royal sort of language. Then you have Zebulun and Issachar. This is the famous, it says Zebulun would engage in commerce and food for the tribe of Issachar, and the tribe of Issachar would engage in the study of Torah. So they have this like symbiotic relationship. And I guess that's reiterated in the end of the Torah in V'zot Bracha, when Moses gives these blessings. This Parsha at the end of the book of Bereshis, Genesis, is very reminiscent of the end of the Torah in V'zot Bracha, when Moses blesses the tribes again. So look forward to that when we complete the Torah. Fine, so then we have more blessings about Issachar. We had Zebulun, coast in the seas. Issachar, a strong-boned donkey, his resting place, right? Dan, so here's something interesting. Dan will avenge his people, one like the tribes of Israel. So it's talking about Samson. Most specifically, Dan will be a serpent in the road, a viper on the path which bites the horse's heels so the rider falls backwards. It's interesting because Rashi relates this to Genesis 3:15. Yeah, you know that passage that Christians claim can only refer to Jesus? Well, clearly Rashi doesn't feel that way, so please don't use rabbinic commentaries, once again, Christians, to say that Rashi agrees with you about Genesis 3:15, that it's speaking about some sort of virgin birth, and that it's only speaking about the Messiah when it says the seed of the woman. Clearly not, because Rashi is relating Genesis 3:15, and you can look at the commentaries he has on it regarding Isaiah. He mentions here Isaiah 11:8, right? It says, an infant shall play over the hole of an old snake and over the eyeball of an adder, and a weaned child shall stretch forth his hand, right? So if you look at rabbinic commentaries concerning this, you will see that there is a link between this and Genesis 3:15. I'm not sure if Rashi comments and says that, but I'm 100% certain that there is a link between Genesis 3:15, that rabbis have made this connection. And clearly, Rashi is making that connection here when he mentions Genesis 3:15 and then he mentions Isaiah 11:8, because if you want to say that Genesis 3:15 is about the future Messianic era, no problem, because Genesis 3:15 is very in line with Isaiah 11:8 in the fact that Isaiah 11:8 explicitly says that no longer will there be enmity between the seed of the woman and the snake, because the infant shall play over the hole of an old snake, right? This is talking about the future Messianic era of world peace. I mean, both Jews and Christians agree on that. This is Isaiah chapter 11, right? This is the wolf shall live with the lamb. Like, this is the future Messianic prophecy that Jesus failed to fulfill. Big surprise. Just kidding. We all know that Jesus did not fulfill these key Messianic prophecies, which is why we continue to rightly reject him as the Messiah. Moving on, we have Gad sort of having military overtones. Asher, I guess, rich food. Naphtali, swift as a gazelle. I'm sorry I'm glossing over some of these. Some of these are interesting. I usually don't see Christians taking those out of context so much. Now, here we have Joseph, right? Now, people always, Christians love to talk about the concept of Mashiach ben Yosef and how it's like some weird rabbinic concept, that why would there be any sort of royal, they try to combine it into one sort of thing. But what I found interesting is that in the blessing that Jacob gave to Joseph, is that it says his bow was strongly established and his arms were girded from the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, and he sustained the rock of Israel. I mean, then you have, I think I skipped over the part that or maybe I didn't. There's a part where, here it is. The blessings of your fathers surpass the blessings of my parents, and the ends of the everlasting hills. May they come to Joseph's head and to the crown of those who was separated from his brothers, right? So you have this royal overtone of Joseph, and you can easily reconcile that by the fact that the kingdom of Israel was ruled by Ephraim, right through Jeroboam. Not saying he was the most righteous king, because he obviously was not a righteous king, but there is a royal overtone in Joseph's blessing, which is why, you can see some underpinnings of where the concept of Mashiach ben Yosef may have come from. So, we can move on to the next aliyah. And here we have, Benjamin is a wolf. In the morning he will devour plunder, and in the evening he will divide the spoil. So this is relating to the book of Esther with Mordechai, and also with King Saul, right, who is a descendant of Benjamin. And I guess that also has some level of royal overtones to it. I don't know, I guess it's a little bit more of a stretch, but we all know what happens, so I guess we can read that into it, but it's not as obvious. So then you have the summation of the 12 tribes being blessed. And this is speaking about the cave of Machpelah, where Jacob will be buried, and he was buried in the cave of Machpelah with Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Rebekah, Leah, with the cave of the patriarchs, as we know, in Hebron today. And it looks like, this is where Jacob passed away, and there was an embalming process. They wept over him for 70 days. Wow. And it says the Egyptians did, right? And with the days weeping had passed, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh. Now I found favor in your eyes. Speak now in Pharaoh's ears. My father Jeremy saying, behold, I'm going to die in my grave, which I dug up out of the land of Canaan. There you shall bury me. So now please let me go up and bury my father in return. So there he went ahead and buried his father. And some Machpelah transfers going to Egypt and Israel and all that fun stuff. Now it says, this is interesting. It says, so they commanded the messengers to Joseph to say, your father commanded us before his death, saying, so you shall say to Joseph, please forgive now your brother's transgressions and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the transition of the servants of the God your father. Joseph wept and spoke to him. And it says his brothers also went and fell before him. They said, behold, we are your slaves. And Joseph said to them, don't be afraid, for am I instead of God, right? Linking them to Hashem, saying, no, don't be afraid of me. This is all the will of Hashem. Indeed, you intended evil against me, but God designed it for good in order to bring what is at present to keep a great populace alive. So Joseph taking the Gamzu Latova approach. This is for the good. This too is for the good. Even when it seems bad, ultimately it is for our good. That is the message. I think that's the core message of really the life, Torah. And I think that's a really important message for us to keep, especially in times of strife. So now do not fear. I will sustain you and your small children. And he comforted them and spoke to their hearts. So he lived to 110 years. Wow. Nice full life. And kind of sums up his life. And he was placed into a coffin in Egypt. There you go. We have finished the entire book of Bereshit. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. So this is what we say typically when we finish a book of the Torah in in synagogue to strength, right? For our strength. So may this video be a blessing to you. And please tune in next week when we start the book of Shemot, also known as Exodus. Shalom Aleichem.